Hi, everyone. Welcome to Stand Up for Lower Merion and Narber's hot topic meeting, which I think I'm going to change to hot issue in the future. And today we're welcoming Anita Friday. Our topic is kind of how to talk to your kids about peer pressure so they can become allies. And I wanted to start with I was at the Human Rights Campaign or Committee's gala last night, and they deal with equality for LGBTQ plus. And one of the things that struck me was this statistic. Since 2021, that's just last year in January and February, 57 trans and non-binary individuals were murdered just for being who they are.
And frankly, primarily Black women.
Yeah, from the pictures I saw, they were primarily Black. And that behavior doesn't just happen overnight. It's something that happens throughout life. Pennsylvania also saw more white supremacist stickers, flyers, and other literature promoting hate than any other state, according to the new report by the Anti-Defamation League. So parents, we cannot be complacent. Our children should be able to live without being shamed for who they are. They should be seen and equally valued. Hate is growing, but we can stem that tide. Activists can turn their anger into actions. So we should react not with fear, but with love. And in light of that, I am wearing this shirt today that is all intersecting circles of all different colors that shows that we are made even more beautiful when we come together, no matter what our differences. That's my interpretation. So I want to thank Annie, your co-host and my partner in Stand Up for Lower Merion. She helps with all the newsletters and organization and everything else. It's really great to work with her. And do you want to say hello, Annie? No, okay, I didn't think so, but I wanted to give you the option. So right now I'm going to turn it over to Anita Friday. And thank you, Anita, for joining us.
My pleasure. Now, the topic that I've chosen, I'm going to do a screen share today, but the topic that I am prepared to share today is talking to your children about race and racism. Okay, let me get rid of that. So you want to talk about racism and race with your children and grandchildren. But before we begin this discussion, I want us all to note that the option about whether or not to have this conversation with our children is a form of advantage that white people have. White people can choose not to have this conversation at all, and some opt to be silent because of fear of upsetting their children or fear of saying the wrong thing, or the misguided sense that color blindness and issues of race are no longer relevant in our post-Obama, post-racial society. And then there's a fourth reason that folks may not talk about it. They can feel comfortable in the freedom that they have for the feeling that they have not to address the issues of race and ethnicity because of the privilege and power position that whiteness provides. But I want you to understand that Black people and folks of color don't have the luxury of being silent when it comes to talking to our children about race. Why? We must prepare our children for surviving in a world that often treats and sees them as less than we as loving parents do. Our children will have, and by elementary school have had, direct experiences of racism and racial bias. And our children need to understand how racism is and will affect their lives. As parents of color, as Black parents, we try to equip them as best we can with the emotional and psychological fortitude to survive. So for the white folks that are here today, I want to commend you for not falling into the category of people who choose to avoid these difficult conversations. Oops. Our news and media often play lead roles in this conversation. According to Common Sense Media, 2 to 8-year-olds in the US spend nearly 3 hours every day on the screen. I should not be on the screen alone in 2070. Be mindful of what children are watching. And how do we raise our children who are able to handle the complex issues of ethnicity? Foremost, it is imperative that we examine our own implicit biases. That is, attitudes and stereotypes that affect our behavior when embarking upon this journey. Implicit biases allow us to create stereotypes, sometimes without even knowing that we're doing so. So I'm going to ask you all to close your eyes for a moment, not you, Jill, if you're walking outside. And I want you to visualize a few scenarios. You're on a flight, and the pilot comes out to greet the passengers. Imagine that. You're at a restaurant, and the couple seated at the table next to you is celebrating an anniversary. The next scenario I want you to envision is you're at your child or neighborhood child's birthday party. Who's there? Okay. Did the pilot look like this?
No, she was a man, though.
Right, right. Those are sort of the implicit biases that we have. Okay. Is this the vision you had when you thought of the couple celebrating their anniversary? Were these the children at the birthday party you would envisioned? And I would imagine that some of you answered no to these questions. And I imagine that there was no intention to discriminate or have negative thoughts about the people you did not imagine. Understand that we all have instinctive responses, and these responses reflect our implicit biases. And implicit bias, if unexamined, is a block to equity. As I mentioned, before we engage in meaningful conversations with our children, grandchildren, friends, young people about race, We need to engage in self-examination. I'd like you to honestly explore the questions raised by this next slide. Hopefully, after the presentation, we'll have a chance to talk about your thoughts and responses to these questions. I don't know if you can see everything. I don't know if my little thing is blocking.
No, it is not.
Okay. So the first question. The first time when I became aware of difference was when? As I was growing up, my parents, guardians taught me that people who were different from me were. As I was growing up, my parents, guardians taught me that people who like us were. A time I was mistreated because of my own difference was when? A time when I mistreated someone for being different was when? I am most comfortable when I'm around people who? I am least comfortable when I am around people who? Memories I have of difference affecting my life are. And you know what, as opposed to waiting to the end, I would like to invite anyone who's willing to raise their hand, and Adrian will acknowledge you and just share thoughts that you have based upon these 8 questions.
I'm going to suggest that people are going to be shy, so I'm going to go first. Oh, no, we got Cora. Cora.
The first time I became aware of a difference was probably 2nd or 3rd grade when we had an army base in my hometown, and a black boy, Paul Watkins. I was fascinated by him. I still remember his name. Of course, I didn't associate with him because I'd already reached that stage where girls don't play with boys. But I was fascinated. And later in 6th, 7th grade, in around there, same school, I was upset when my teacher told me that the whites on the West Shore, which is where I lived with Harrisburg, were forming a human bridge, human barrier against blacks walking over one of the bridges. And I was very upset about that. And I went home and told my mom, and she told me that they did the same with Catholics, several decades earlier. And that's when I realized that things were wrong. I can't think, those are the 2 things that I'm most comfortable about people I know. I'm getting more and more comfortable with Anita because I respect her, and we've been in different things, but I don't know her that well. I'm least comfortable around people I don't know. That's just me. I try to look beyond what somebody looks like. My one niece and her spouse live in the Netherlands because they're both women, and they got more acceptance there, including from the Catholic Church. When she first mentioned it to me, I had difficulty processing it, but I accepted her. I wasn't going to stop loving her because of it. So I'm trying constantly to realize what I do and don't, how I can change myself. But most of the time I recognize that I am the problem, and I tried to pass that on to my son. And I know that he has friends who are gay. He's okay with different colors and stuff like that. When he was growing up, when he went to camp, a local camp, he had a friend who was Muslim. He had friends who were Jewish. It did not matter. It's respecting other cultures is what I always tried to teach. So it's hard, but it's hard. It's so hard because you do have those instinctive responses that lead to internal biases, and you have to face them, and that's really hard.
Thank you, Corinne. That's one of the reasons I have these questions, because I hope that everyone has a chance to reflect upon that. And since this group is integrated, I will talk about being treated as different as a Black woman child and experiences that I've had. And one of the things that I think, since we're talking about, since this group probably has come together a lot because of what's going on in the school district, one of the things that I and most of my Black friends remember is if we were in integrated school environments, when the Civil War was discussed and the textbook read simply, Black people were slaves. And if there were 19 kids in the class and there were 2 Black kids in the class, there were 38 eyes staring at us. And I remember at the time, without the knowledge, without the history that I had, I felt a sense of shame. Now I'm bringing that up just to sort of segue to the, I guess, noise about education and diverse education, real education in the public schools. And I just think that when there is true equity in education, the discomfort that I felt and every Black person I've ever spoke to in that situation felt is as valued as white discomfort. And I would imagine for my Asian brothers and sisters, my brown brothers and sisters, my Latino brothers and sisters, my Native brothers and sisters, there's a similar kind of feeling when these issues are brought up in classroom. So I'm diverging a little bit just to have you think about being other and why it's so important for the whole story to be told. Any thoughts about that? Okay, I will continue. Give me 1 second. Okay. The next thing we need to do as parents, grandparents, and people who care for young people is understand that conversations with our children or anyone on this topic is hard. But that it's hard is no excuse to avoid it. With so many external factors affecting children, clearly we want the messages that they receive, the values that they hold, are ones that we share. As we aim to raise children who embrace equity and justice, it's important that we cannot afford to be indifferent. Remember, our children are watching us. In addition to conducting self-assessment, it's important for parents to engage in self-education as well. Any conversation that you have with your children will not be a one-time occurrence. As such, your efforts towards self-education and self-assessment must be ongoing. I'm assuming that your intent in having these conversations with children is that in addition to being racially conscious, ultimately they become anti-racist, that is, citizens who in their lives actively fight and challenge racism and prejudice in the world. I am also assuming that you recognize the strong likelihood that the children will be working as adults in a world where success depends upon collaboration and understanding among a diverse workforce. It may not surprise you that most adults believe that parents should start talking to their children about race when they're 5. However, research has shown that 3-month-old babies prefer faces with certain racial groups from certain racial groups. 9-month-olds use race to categorize faces, and 3-year-old children in the US associate some racial groups with negative traits. By age 4, Children in the US associate whites with wealth and higher status, and race-based discrimination is already widespread when children start elementary school. Remember, children are paying attention and noticing patterns like who lives in their neighborhood, who their family associates with, and who their parents' friends are. What we are teaches our children far more than what we say. So we must be what we want our children to become. From the moment our children are born, they're participants in a hugely consequential, ongoing conversation about race and ethnicity of which we and they may only be dimly aware of. The flock of cheerful crows whom Dumbo and his friend Timothy encounter speak, sing, and act in a way that smacks of an African-American minstrel show and those stereotypes. Plus, their leader's name is Jim Crow. Our news and entertainment media play lead roles in these conversations. If we do not push back from unwelcome messages, our children will assume that we agree with them. So what can we do with our elementary children who have already been affected by living in a world where membership in certain groups allows some to sit on top? Now, many people have purchased multicultural reading material for their young children. In 2012, a study published by the Journal of Child Development, researchers found that mere reading is not enough. Our children look to us. Reading without saying to the children that we, parents, agree with the book's message, or elaborating on messages that don't work, doesn't work. So what would an effective conversation about a book that we read to our children look like? Let's look at this book, All Welcome. What sort of things does the cover say? We could ask our children, who do they see in the drawing? Does this look like a place they've been? We could ask them how they feel seeing this image. We can ask them whether this cover feels right to them. From a young age, clear statements like, some people on television or schools have different skin color. Even though people come from different backgrounds, they are good people and you can be their friend. If a child of a different color lived in our neighborhood, would you like her or him to be your friend? Are ways to engage in meaningful age-appropriate conversations about race. It is also important to teach our children empathy and to respect others. For example, to help them understand what being in the racial minority is like, you can ask them questions like, when we watch TV, we are fortunate to see many people who look like us on the screen. Imagine that you never or rarely saw people who look like you on the TV with your skin or hair color. How would that make you feel? Then state that Black and brown or Asian girls rarely see TV shows about people who look like them. That can make them feel sad. There are many children in America who aren't white, and it's too bad that there aren't more programs about people like them on TV, isn't it? Tell your children you value diversity. In a study conducted by researchers at Sesame Street, believe it or not, fewer than 1/2 of the children believed that their parents would be happy if they had a friend of another race. In situations where a child asks questions or behaves in a way towards a person who appears other than what they are familiar with, we as parents have to control the narrative, even though we may be uncomfortable or afraid doing so. In her book, White Fragility, Robin DiAngelo gives an example where a parent shushes a child and tells them to be quiet when he points to a Black man in the supermarket and asks about his color. By shushing the child, the parent is creating a sense that there is something wrong with the Black man, that there is something that should not be mentioned about his skin color. How much better would it have been if the parent had said that people come in a variety of colors? What if the parent had explained to the child that colors, features, hair type, and physical difference are a result of the human adaptation to geography, in language that a child could understand? When humans migrated from Africa to colder European climates, there was less need for protection from the sun, and people in Europe are lighter because of it. We as parents, through self-education, can be ready to provide our children with helpful responses. We need to be present and be aware of how we sit with our own feelings of discomfort. You see, in doing this work, we not only are helping to prepare our children to thrive in a diverse world, but we are also helping them to develop into lifelong learners who will continue to remain curious. We can have big conversations with young children on their level. For example, an 8-year-old boy may push another child. Language like "you should not touch another child in that way," and that you do not like it, sets the groundwork for later understanding ideas of sexual consent. I like the idea of teaching young children about being curious and proud about the rich cultures, identities, and ethnicities that make up Americans, including their own. Clear messages from parents are important. We need to say to our children that there is racism, and that racism means that people are treated unfairly and denied opportunities because of their skin color. We need to say that that is wrong. Elementary school children can learn to be upstanders. That is, someone who uses kind words and actions to help themselves and friends. Children can learn from our sharing times with them that we have stood up for someone. At this age, they're still interested in what and who we are. Focus on empathy. If you can imagine yourself in the shoes of another person, your kids will too. By teaching kids the simple acts of sharing and taking turns, they will learn to see the world through the eyes of someone else. When children develop into adults who value dignity and respect, they will better understand that these are universal values if they have the moral foundation and the value of empathy. And it's important to talk to your children before anyone else does. Ask them lots of questions and encourage them to do the same. If you remain open-minded, your children will also, and it's okay to say, "I'm not sure. Let's come back to that later." But then do come back to it later. Call out implicit bias and question unconscious associations we make about what's good and what's bad. An obvious challenge is that despite many people's intentions, America is still a deeply segregated nation.
Anita, we have a question here. Somebody's asking, and I don't know if you have the answer to this, but birthday parties, where all the kids would be invited used to happen, but with COVID and stuff, those
Mhm.
things are not happening as much. I don't even think you can bring cupcakes into the school anymore.
Mhm.
So are there other ways parents can foster inclusive opportunities for play and friendship? I mean, if you think of sports, not everybody is able to play sports or is good at sports.
Mhm.
Do you have any?
Sure. I mean, the thing is that in this communities, what I see is many people doing play dates and having friends over. And I know that that's difficult with COVID, but COVID won't be here forever. The other thing that's possible, when my children were smaller, we would take friends to the city, to the Please Touch Museum, which I know is more difficult under COVID, but just inviting friends and opening the door to everyone who's in the community. I don't know if that answers the question. I see some other.
Yeah, Sandra has her hand up.
Okay.
I was going to say, adding to that conversation, one thing that I've seen in some groups where people have asked similar questions is the suggestion to go to playgrounds outside of your neighborhood. So going to areas where, I mean, if kids are running around playing on a playground, especially as the weather gets nicer, they're around other kids. They're seeing, especially if you live in an area where there's not as much diversity, it's a great way to just get your kids comfortable with being in places that aren't always the same place in the same environment. So I just wanted to throw that into the conversation.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. There were some other things in the chat. I don't know if there were. Okay.
That was the thing I asked about, was kind of Christina's, what Christina had posted.
Okay.
If I left something out or you need something clarified, Christine, please raise your hand.
Okay.
I think we covered it then.
Thank you. Yeah, not only are our communities segregated, but American schools are more segregated now than they were 30 years ago. Okay, so here's the answer to the question that was raised. So what can you do? Venture out of your neighborhood and expose your children to different people, not as a voyeur, but as an equal participant. Experience is much more powerful than reading and talking. Help your kids learn to identify racism and teach them how to deal with it when they see it. Often, when a young person points out difference, they are asking a question and looking to you for guidance. For example, a child may say, "That person is fat." Normalize the difference. Say, "She is one body type. Your body type is thin. Mommy is fat also." That kind of response teaches young children that it's okay to be different. And lift up freedom fighters. Tell stories of resistance and resilience. These stories are universal and feature the lives and experiences of people from a variety of backgrounds. Every story of racial, religious, or ethnic oppression is also a story about fighting back. Teach your children those parts of the story too. We can help develop superheroes. I said these conversations must be ongoing. Education must be consistent. These conversations are different as our children become older. But again, the need for self-reflection in education exists when having conversations in teens and adolescents about race. Hopefully, the base that I discussed earlier has been established by the time your children or young people you care for are in this age group. However, there's some additional questions that may be a part of our self-reflection. We've encouraged our children to be open and to socialize with people from all backgrounds when they're younger. Not that they are dating, do we encourage and support socializing and dating across racial lines? In the spirit of honesty, these are photos of my children, and that question is one that I've really had to grapple with. What stereotypes are perpetuated in the music they listen to? We have to stay involved. What websites are they visiting? What TV shows are they watching? And what messages about difference are being presented in these areas? Teens and adolescents have many more outside and peer influencers than they did as young children. What are they learning in school? Google exists, and it is so easy to get a true sense of US history. That is, history viewed from the perspective of all groups who are participants in that event. For example, when my daughter was in second grade, I was involved with creating a curriculum regarding, Indigenous people. And we looked at 1492 and the song that most of us were taught in elementary school in 1492, Christopher Columbus discovered America. And I drew a map of the world and I pointed to East India, and the kids realized that that was where Christopher was supposed to go. And these children were able to say, Mrs. Friday, he was lost. And then we talked about the Taino Indians and what happened to them when Columbus came. And they said, he was horrible. And then we talked about Spain and Queen Isabella and what the intent was and riches and such that he brought back. And in that sense, from that perspective, it was positive. But it's important for children to have all of those perspectives, and then they can discern, understand, and be better thinkers. And again, it's really, really easy as parents to do. If you're speaking with your kids, look at their history books and or their articles and talk about who else was there. Who else was there during the doctrine of discovery, or what was it when the Louisiana Purchase and sovereign destiny? There were Native people on the land. Those are conversations that
Manifest destiny.
I'm sorry, manifest destiny. Yeah.
Yeah.
Making the world safe for democracy at the end of the war. Those are important conversations, again, because we want thinking children. We want thinking citizens, actually. Teens are keenly aware of social status and group membership. There is ranking in social groups. Interestingly enough, this allows them to be more aware of the perspective of others. They're more able to empathize and have a better understanding of people who are possessed because they are sensitive to the feeling of exclusion. Am I in the in crowd? Who's in? Who's out? And even those who are in may fear the possibility of one day being out. Teens are also developing personal identities and are sometimes threatened by difference. This is a critical time because they can either put down people with difference or accept them. Home, again, and the values we model are critical. Since teens often associate with people who are like them, we as parents can provide opportunities for them to expand the diversity of their experience. I don't know what's happening with this slide. Probably just give me a second. Have you asked your kids about their friend group? Are your children learning about the experience of their classmates of different ethnic backgrounds? Are they learning about the experiences that their classmates are having in the same school and classrooms? I'm going to share a few posts from Instagram from Black Mainline Speaks. Maybe looking at these and the hundreds of other posts on Instagram may be a way to start a conversation with your adolescent or teen tonight. And I'll just read the one from William Penn Charter, and you can talk to your kids about these. An anchor room came to Penn Charter to talk about her experiences. Someone asked if she was Black. A white boy said, well, her name is Monica, not Moniqua. Other boys kept repeating this like it was the funniest thing, including the Black students who looked visibly uncomfortable and embarrassed. There are hundreds of experiences like this posted in Instagram from the private schools, from the public schools, about the types of experiences that people of color are having in our communities. One thing we can do is provide opportunities for our children to develop real relationships with diverse groups of people. You can enroll them in weekend activities or sports. And I know that Adrian said everyone isn't an athlete, but there are programs at the Free Library in Philadelphia. There are programs in various communities in Ardmore. There's after-school programs at some of the churches. And again, your children, white children, can participate not as observers, but as equal participants. They can volunteer to do social justice work with and not for diverse members. Creating brave spaces in your home is a way to navigate these years. Creating brave spaces allows growth. Brave spaces are places where judgment is withheld. Brave spaces foster a sense of love and create opportunities to do right. So, as a parent of teens, we might ask, well, how do we get our kids to even talk to us? Keep talking. Use current issues like the election, the environment, immigration, or Black Lives Matter to start a conversation. Teens relate to inquiry. Ask what they think about certain issues and let them talk. Really try to respect their views, even if you disagree. Make yourself available and don't allow one-word answers to be sufficient. Probe deeper, and again, listen to what they say. Meals, walks, and family activities are times when brave spaces can be created. Teach your teenagers to be brave. There may be family members, your teen witnesses, or hearers being prejudiced. That's when we have to call the relatives out on it and teach our kids to be brave enough not to be silent bystanders to wrong. There are issues of exclusion everywhere in this country, so there are always plenty of opportunities to talk about it with our children. This also helps them learn to identify these situations. The lessons of kindness and empathy that started when they were young must constantly be reinforced. We set the example. It's important to talk to your high school and middle school children about being socially critical. They should be able to look at society and provide feedback about how we can continue to have real conversations about privilege. They may have, and then talk about they can use that power to socially criticize. We shouldn't assume that we as adults are the resident experts. The kids may be more adept at recognizing bigotry than even we are. They are in school. They're having conversations online. The kids may have an even bigger sense of what constitutes racism than we do. So it's important as adults to really listen and hear what teens are saying. They're questioning what is happening around them, and they know that the struggle for racial fairness is happening. Let them know that your family can take part in the struggle. We parents must also be active in this work. Whenever possible, connect the conversation you're having to the change you and your children want to see. Brainstorm about ways you can be the change. Humans have been fighting for justice and fairness forever. Hopefully, at some point, liberation will be achieved for all.
Thank you, Anita. I just want to add some things in that I gleaned off the internet. I have some calls into some child psychologists. I found them too late to have them really included in this meeting, but there will be a follow-up with things that I got for ideas for you guys on how to talk with your kids. But here's a couple things. Discuss with your child and let them know that their opinion matters as much as anyone else's. If you feel uncomfortable or that a request that a friend is making is wrong, go with that feeling and let them know, even if you don't let them know that it's wrong because of the peer pressure and that whole hierarchy of groups. But then you have to ask yourself, is the friend, and I put that in quotes, who is asking or demanding a certain behavior actually acting like a friend? Talk to your kids, tell the kids to talk to their friends separately, one-on-one, and find out who agrees with you and who doesn't, that these unacceptable behaviors are right or wrong. So if they agree with you that the behavior is unacceptable, ask them if they'll speak out when that other person in the group asks the kids to go do something. I'm specifically referring to the name calling. Shaming somebody is not acceptable behavior. To remember, everyone is different, but those differences should not be something one should be made to be ashamed of. Shaming others is not funny. And all people have a right to be seen as equal and valued, no matter what their situation. My hair's dark, my eyes are brown. Are blue-eyed people so different? They're than brown-eyed people or green-eyed people. Why is there such an emphasis on the skin color and not the hair color? I guess because we can kind of change our hair color. But
I was wondering though, Adrienne, if anyone had any thoughts or questions after the presentation or things that they might want to share.
that's exactly where I was going, because I was stopping right now and
Okay.
turning it back to you. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
I can ask a question if no one else want to jump in.
Mitchell, you're inside.
I am. Woo. So I feel like, so my kids are a freshman in college and a sophomore in high school. And I feel like the earlier you start with all of these conversations, is a little easier. They're a little more spongy and less set in their ways. And to a certain extent, I feel like there's for some reason, more opportunity for diversity in elementary school, at least in my experience with the friends that my kids had. So I guess without taking too much time, what are some opportunities for teenagers to really branch out when they're a little more set in their ways, and the separation in the cafeteria and the different groups? I feel like it's a lot harder to try and encourage them to diversify.
Well, again, as I said, people are making distinctions by age 3 months, 6 months, 9 months.
Mhm.
And so hopefully the conversation would have been ongoing, and that children, this is ideal and it's what you do now, but ideally by being in a home, being in a community where all sorts of folks are welcome, stepping out of your comfort zone, going into different places. For instance, I grew up at a time in Missouri when communities were recently integrated. I grew up in a predominantly white area, and there were organizations that were going on in the city of St. Louis, where I grew up, Junior Achievement. And I joined, a different group because I wanted to have exposure, and some of my white friends came along as well. By high school, they've already picked up on the differences in values. So it's just to have at that point conversations, because I've had high schoolers and 20-year-olds, and they're not going to do something because you tell them to. It's interesting when a child is going off to college and selecting a roommate, they can list these days what it is that they're interested in and what they want to learn. And a person could say that I am interested in experiencing someone who's not from Pennsylvania, someone who doesn't have Brian, and that can be a part of their request. At universities, there are different clubs for different ethnic groups and religions. But that curiosity at that point comes from the child. And that curiosity comes from what they've seen in their family as they were growing up in their community. Does that help? Does that answer it a little bit, Jill?
A little, yeah. I think, the opportunities are a little, I don't know, between the opportunities maybe being a little fewer and far between, maybe, but maybe not. It just depends on your kid. And at that age, the willingness to be open-minded and branch out.
Yeah, at that point, they're grown. Yeah. But that doesn't mean you can't say to them what you value and who you are, and share with them how you live your life.
Yeah, they know, they see me, they know, so
Yeah.
I guess it's more being comfortable going out of their comfort zone is, I think, one of the big challenges.
Right. Well, everyone's being so quiet, so I guess.
Yeah, no.
Well, thank you for joining. Oh, Shamika, are you going to say something?
Yeah, I was, and I apologize for the noisy background. I just wanted to add, as an educator, what we don't say is louder than what we do say. Whether you're walking through the halls and you hear something and you don't stop to correct it, or when you're teaching a lesson, you happen to say things like he, she, and you leave out they. When you're acknowledging pronouns. So I think there's a lot that we can do to model, but just make sure that we don't get stuck on because I am a Black woman, I do not have to, or because I have a gay friend, that's all I need to show that I am with it. It's more than what you have and who you are. Anti-racism is a verb. It's an action, and it's something that we have to do instead of just be. And I think it's something that we all grow in. No one has arrived. So that's just what I wanted to add. So thank you.
Thank you for that.
Thank
So
you.
Debbie put in a question. What do you say when your children use derogatory language are basically, we're talking about the N-word, right? That's what we're talking about. And what do you do when white children use the N-word? And I practice what I preach. I talk to my children about it and what their thoughts were. Oh, that wasn't the question, Debbie. So
It looks like it was more like the kids are giving the excuse for using it, that their friends that are people of color are using.
yeah,
that word.
that's where I was going.
Okay,
Yeah, that's where I was going. My children are children of color, so I wanted to talk to them about, you know, their thoughts and their feelings about that, and we had this discussion. And what, interestingly enough, my daughter said to me was, and we have brave spaces in our home, Mom, I can be ticked off at you and I can say my mom is such a bitch. But if one of my friends said it, they don't have the right. And she said that is the same thing with the N-word. And I think that when your children say that word and they say, my friends say it, if their friends are people of color, it's something that is, I don't personally like, but I'm old, but it's something that is a part of the youth culture, and they don't have the right to say it, just like no one else has the right to call you the B word other than your son under his breath in his room under the pillow when he's ticked off. Same thing.
Amen. I would also add, looking at the history, whether it's watching a TED Talk with your child, something that unpacks the history of that word so that a child has a full understanding of where it came from, and even opening that up to the N-word. You know, there was a time where the N-word became something because actually using the NI word was something that people didn't want to do. So just unpacking that and having that conversation with your child. I opened up that conversation at Reach at Bala Kenwood with our students, and you know, the children asked me, Ms. Brown, what do you think? You know, they heard from so-called experts and they wanted to know what I thought and whether I use the word or not. And I told them I don't. And I told them the reason why I don't use that word. I was also transparent and sharing with them some of my family members who do use that word. So I think creating a space to have the conversation so that the kid has a full understanding, including the history of where it comes from and how it's used in the present day, and talking about it, opposed to just saying, don't do that because I said so. That's something else that doesn't work with the generation that we are blessed to have with us.
Right. Thank you again, because that's my response was they're talking to you, you're in the hall, there's, you know, it's a quick thing because you don't often have the time with teens to sit down and have the deeper conversation, but that is the next thing to do if they're willing, you know, or to listen, to talk about the derivation of the word.
Cora has her hand up.
Yeah. Cora?
Yeah, I think what Joe had mentioned was really cool about the teens, and I thought, I don't know how you can do it, but what I started to think of was something that Anita mentioned, where you go experience a different neighborhood with your kids. Well, maybe go out and explore something that you're interested in exploring that might show something you would, and then come back and tell your kids about, because that might be a way to pull it in. Or for me, you know, one of the things I want to share, and I didn't share it my son's in 25, so we usually only talk once a week. So, and I didn't mention it this time, but Anita mentioned it. And I don't know if it was Anita or someone else that mentioned it at a book club, that the shame that people of color feel when they see history only as slaves or Civil War or whatever. And that to me is just plain wrong. And I need to bring that up because that's something I'm learning that no person should feel shame about their heritage, personal belief. And it's hard.
Well, the other thing that you know, just like there are multiple perspectives in history, Jill, I don't know what your child, your 22-year-old or your high school student is interested in, but let's say that they're interested in horses. There are the Black riders in Philadelphia, the Black stables in Philadelphia and West Oak Lane. So, see if there's a pot to go visit there. It's just a function often of that perspective with your child. There's another way to look at what it is that they do and what it is that they love. There are other people, other ethnicities who are experiencing doing that thing in a way. Because what really is, bye Nancy, because what's really important is that there's commonality. And unfortunately, because of the poison of racism and bias and such that permeate our society, folks don't get a chance to understand that commonality. The American Museum has a fabulous exhibit going on in Philadelphia now. If your child is interested in art, take them there to see that exhibit. Yeah. Oh, neat. That's great. Thank you for that.
Hi, I'm in the car. I can't figure out how to raise my hand. I'm sorry.
That's
Can I?
fine.
Oh. I think for me, a huge part of what we experience is the stereotypes and the microaggressions. I think those are way more difficult to deal with because they happen so frequently.
Mhm.
Like, a teacher who told my son that he looks like Ice Cube, who is a rapper. A kid who came up to my son and said, why aren't you hood? I think those are the most difficult things. You obviously have the really big deals and the blatant racism that you experience, but the microaggressions and the stereotypes that you have to speak against all the time I think they're just more difficult overall for my son. I can't speak for everybody in this district, but I think for my son, that is what is most frustrating to him, to have to explain, like, well, why do you think I should be hood, or why a teacher thinks he looks like a rapper? So I just think if we as a community could do some education around microaggressions and stereotypes, that would be where I think some of our most difficult issues would be resolved.
Thank you, Michelle. And it's interesting because it's hard to do this lecture because if I was speaking just to Black parents, there would be a whole another side to the conversation. But Michelle, I hear you. And so, with my kids, and it's pervasive. It's not just this district. It's walking down the street, right? It's walking down the street when your son's a teenager and white folks walk across the street, or people lock the cars. So to me as a parent, it's the first step is to have my children understand that they are whole and they are beautiful and they are loved, and it's the other person's problem. That's sort of the core of it. But then the next thing is to empower my children once they have that wholeness and it's hard with adults, but to respond with truth, to respond with questions. When there was and it takes my kids were in the TE school district, and every time there was fried chicken served, the students would go, "Oh, it's the Friday boys, they're going to have some fried chicken." One child was more sensitive and he would just not order the fried chicken even though he loved it. And the other one said, I don't care. I'm going to eat what I love, and I don't care what you say. With teachers, it's harder. But again, that's also a part of what we as parents have to fight constantly. Again, when I started my talk, I said that this is not a conversation that people of color can avoid having because of the experiences that their children will have every single day. So our children are fortified. We hope that they at some point can talk about, at least to you, how this felt, at times to their peers or people who committed the microaggressions about how that felt, and demand respect. And then if that doesn't work, then we as parents step in and demand accountability. Now, I understand that there's some things that have been going on Lower Merion where the schools have not responded as we would hope. And then the next step, again, we talk about being anti-racist, is organizing, as Stand Up for Lower Merion, Stand for Lower Merion and the other organizations are. So it's you know, make your child whole, love themselves, give them tools, and if the tools don't work, advocate for them. And if advocacy doesn't work, then act.
And let your children who are white know that this is unacceptable behavior, and if they hear it and see it, they should speak out. And I tried to give you a couple tools.
Yeah, but so the thing is, the whole thing is, yes, this is bad and speak out, but I'm thinking about even going deeper than that. And the deeper part is empathy. So someone says, why don't you wear a hoodie? Okay, there's education in that. Is that hoodie language started with Trayvon Martin. Trayvon Martin was murdered because he was in his own neighborhood, and his neighborhood was predominantly white. Trayvon Martin had friends. How would you feel if one of your friends was murdered and a trope was made of his hoodie? See, and then that's more than it's wrong. That's the thinking, that's the understanding, that's the developing the empathy, that's teaching your children, giving them the tools to go beyond and to be superstars. Because mommy said I shouldn't say it because it's not nice is not the same as if someone killed my friend because they had a lacrosse stick, and a lacrosse stick became a trope for wrong. And if I wasn't in community, someone said to me, why don't I have a lacrosse stick? It wouldn't feel good.
It's personalizing it more than just taking it that step further. It's great.
Having them feel a situation that would enable them to feel what that person felt. You know, the other one that Black people experience oftentimes is hair, right? You know, and I remember well, my dad is old school, so I mean he's 91, and when people would comment about my sister and my hair, he'd say, and this is the inner love that he gave us. And pardon me, this is not PC for white folks, but he would say white people have hair like a horse's tail, and all it does is swish to sweep flies off the ass. And I was like, yeah. So, I mean, it's one way that, you know, as opposed, yeah. So anyway, yeah.
Yeah, all the years my mother made me get permanents, the home perms when I was younger, because it was just, yeah. So it was, and then, you know, and then it's like hysterical to me when I think back at some of those things like that and how racist she was, because she grew up in West Philly, living above a a luncheonette that my uncle owned. And I always got a lot of that racism as a
Hi,
learned,
Betsy.
as a learned behavior. And it, even as much work as I do, it was a couple years ago, I'm in the Wynwood Shopping Center, and I was in the Japanese restaurant that's kind of on the corner. And I noticed more and more that there was a whole integrated group of shoppers, you know, in the shopping center. And I went, oh my God, that's wonderful. And then this little thing in the back of my brain went, what about property values? And it's like, that's how deeply ingrained this stuff is
Yeah.
in us. And I recognized it right away and beat it down. And I'm relaying this story because I want people to know that it's a process. And even as much work as you do, there's some stuff that has been ingrained in you since birth that you really have to pay attention to and recognize it. And and know that it's not, you can have those thoughts, but if you recognize it for what they are, then the next time that thought isn't going to go as
Bye, Vivian.
far.
Bye, Vivian. Shamika, you wanted to say something, and I think people are getting ready to
Yeah, I think it's about,
Yes, I just wanted to say that those thoughts that you're speaking of are not only ingrained in white people, but they're also ingrained in Black people too. So this work about being anti-racist and representation and what we teach in those conversations need to be had across the board, because some of our students of color are coming in and judging each other based on their hair because they have internalized it as well. So there's a work to be done. White people need to talk to white people about racism. And for our Black students and our students of color, we have to do the internal work to turn that narrative around and make sure we understand that even in the state of oppression, there was resilience, resistance, and revolt. And we need to make sure that we highlight that for the Black child, for the white child, for all children as well. So that's it. And I'm turning off now. Thank you.
As the young people say, Shamika.
yeah. So I just want to add that this conversation is not just Black and white, but it has to do with gender and there's another term and I messed it up, but you know, and it has to do with not only Black and white, but Black, brown, and white.
Yeah, I mentioned,
Yeah, and it has to do with ability and disability and language. We had one on Mainline Restaurant Reviews where somebody was kind of mocking the, what he called broken English of a restaurant owner when he comes into a Chinese restaurant. And there was some education happening there, but and people said they didn't see how that was a problem. They were just relaying what it was. And somebody brought up, oh, well, Mel Brooks and Richard Pryor wouldn't be able to do things. And one of the things that came into my mind later was Mel Brooks was making fun of the people that did that type of stuff. And the fact that that went over your head speaks a lot, but it's just so ingrained, and you have to be, and in being anti-racist, you can't just come out holier than thou. I think that's really important because that shuts other people down, and having a perspective of trying to do it from a point of empathy.
okay.
And I said to him, well, you know, this person speaks 2 languages. That's way better than me, you know.
Yeah.
So there we go. It's all around us.
Yeah, we'll teach our children to be upstanders.
Yeah.
Thank you for inviting me to do this.
Yes, thank you, everyone, for attending. I really appreciate that. The video, I'll put the video on the YouTube channel and then share it on our group, Stand Up for Laura Marion, Stand Up for LMN-FYI. Please share this with your friends and relatives too. And I think that and I will follow this up with some things from some actual child psychologists, not just me.
All right.
Thank you.
Take care. Enjoy this beautiful day, everyone.
All right,
Thank you,
bye.
everybody.